Well, morena, everybody. I'd just like to call our meeting to order. It's good to have a very full crew today. Very full chamber. So look, I'm going to invite Dale Marie, before we start today, to open us with an appropriate karakia. The floor is yours, Dale Marie.
Tēnā tātou i te whare, I raro i te kapua pauri i te kauhui maunga, e tumu e moe i tō moenga rā i te ariki. He inoi tātou. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, tae, ki e. Come forth from above, come forth from below, come forth from within, come from within the tile, vitality and well-being for all, strengthened in unity. Kia ora koutou.
Hi, thank you. Kia ora. Wonderful. Look, opening comments from myself this morning. A couple of points I need to raise before I substantively address my opening comments. One is that reminder there's to be no electioneering in the chamber today. We also, as you'll all be aware, have a very large agenda and it's important that we stay on track. So let's be efficient with our time use and respectful of each other's time use. And we will be relying on standing orders in respect of the notice of motion item in our agenda. Also, just want to note we have media in the room, including a photographer. So you might want to put on your lipstick again if you want a good picture.
I'm not ready.
No, not you, Philip. Okay, just... Excellent. Okay. Well, kia ora koutou. As we gather for our final meeting of this traineum, I wanted to first begin by acknowledging the extremely sad passing of Te Ariki Sir Tumu Te Hiuhiu. His passing, of course, is a profound loss, not only to Ngāti Tūwharetoa, but to the wider nation. Sir Tumu's distinguished leadership and wisdom were evident in many spheres, not only in his unwavering service to iwi, of course, but cultural preservation and conservation. His vision and very quiet strength have left an enduring legacy of mana and integrity and guardianship that will continue to inspire future generations, I'm sure. So can I ask us all to stand and just share a moment's silence, acknowledging his sad passing. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you. Now, I also want to take this opportunity, as it is the last gathering of our full council for this traineum, to acknowledge the remarkable amount of work that we've undertaken in this last 3 years. This council has navigated some of the most complex and demanding challenges local government can actually ever face, from the uncharted territory of our enhanced annual plan process, adopting the long-term plan, committing to finding decades-long solutions to the ongoing challenges of water reform, development of our first spatial plan, Ahoaki, and shaping up what our organisation could look like into the future as an anchor institution. Alongside all of those very big rocks and big pieces, of course, we've worked through a series of important bylaw reviews, each with very much careful attention to detail and community voice, while at the same time making sure good old BAU work is done with strategic vision and clarity. So despite the weight of all that workload, I think what's defined this council has been our collective commitment to keep the aspirations and needs of our community at the heart of our decision-making always. The choices haven't, as we all know around this table, been easy, but they've always been grounded in a shared desire to ensure Waipa communities continue to thrive and remains a great place that people want to call home. So today's an opportunity to reflect briefly on that journey and to acknowledge the effort and dedication that has gone into it. And so I guess acknowledgement must go to our staff, many of whom we all know go well and above and beyond what is ordinarily expected of them. So on behalf of elected members, I want to wholeheartedly thank you all, both those in the room and those not in the room, people in reserves, people doing, everywhere, it's a great team effort. And to everybody that's seated around this table, we may not have always seen eye to eye on things, but that is the strength and power of democracy in action. So to thank you all for your ongoing commitment to do what's right for your communities. And look, it would be remiss of me not to mention our respective partners and families who have to contend often with absent spouses and people and partners with noses and agendas. So I just want to acknowledge the contributions that they pay to support us all. So thank you. And finally, a huge thank you, of course, to the people we're all really here for, which is the people of Waipa, who've enabled us to serve them through these exceptionally challenging times. It has been our collective privilege to make these decisions on your behalf. So, without any further ado, let's crack into it. I've made my opening statement. I've just acknowledged that we've got a couple of people in the room, including media. So let's move into our agenda. The first of those is apologies. I have apologies for partial attendance from Councillor Gower, who's streaming in online presently to join us. Thank you, Marcus. Nice to see you, but he will only be here for a portion of the meeting and then she'll move on. So can I have somebody happy to move that? Philip will move that and Andrew will second that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Great. Disclosures of members' interests. Dale Marie.
I'll just disclose that I'm a descendant of Parawira Marae for the point with Tiriti today, Tiriti Reserve. Yeah.
Ka whai. Kia ora. Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Dale Marie. We'll just note that. And I'm not aware of there being any late items. Staff aren't jumping up telling me there are any, so we'll tick on. Confirmation of the order of the meeting. I'm comfortable that the order of the meeting being confirmed. Lou will second that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Good stuff. Confirmation of our minutes from our meeting in August the 27th. Claire.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did find a little error. I'd just like to check. That's on page 72. It's the item 10 and the second paragraph. It says Auditor General Renee Van Zyl. I don't think Renee is the Auditor General just yet. I think it's the Audit Director. Director.
That's a good promotion, isn't it?
I think she's been an excellent choice.
Just didn't have to tell Renee. Good spotting. Well, thank you for that.
James.
James?
It should be representative of the Auditor General.
Okay, so it should be reflected as representative of the Auditor General. Thank you. So on that basis, are you comfortable, Claire, removing that they are true and correct? Philip, are you going to second that one for me? I will therefore put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Good stuff. On to tab 7 then, which is our notice of motion. I just want to welcome not only Marcus online, nice to see you, Marcus, but also Judith Cheney, who is a partner at Simpson Grierson. Thank you for joining with us today, Judith. It's lovely to have you here in support of our staff in respect of this item. So this item is divided into two parts. The first is the staff advice or report as it appears in our agenda, and the second is dealing with a notice of motion in its substantive sense. So I will invite Diana and staff to speak to the report first. And can I request that we hold questions until the end of the staff presentation so that they can get through what their advice is in response to said motion. So morning, nice to see you, Diana, and obviously Wayne and Kirsty. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tēnā koutou. As you're aware, staff became aware of a notice of motion that was going to be considered at today's council meeting. And the purpose of the notice of motion was to make a designation under the Public Places Bylaw. And the stated purpose of that was to deal with the transport effects of a proposed sand quarry on Newcombe Road. And staff do acknowledge that there are concerns about those transport effects, but we wanted to ensure that elected members were fully informed before making this decision. And and that helps align with to meet the Chief Executive's duty to provide you with advice under the Local Government Act. So since the notice of motion was provided, staff have provided advice, which is included in your agenda. We received an email yesterday proposing an amended notice of motion would be proposed at today's meeting. And so the purpose of today's item is to provide advice on the original notice of motion, but also to provide you with advice on the proposed amended notice of motion to ensure that you're fully informed prior to making your decision. So with me today, we have, of course, Wayne Allen and Kirsty Downey. We also have Quentin and Brian to assist. And of course, we've got Judy Cheney from Simpson Greyston, who will be also to assist. So just to, as a reminder, in your agenda today is a proposed notice of motion, which seeks to make a designation under the Public Places Bylaw. Council staff in their report outlined a number of concerns that they had, they wished for you to be aware of before considering that notice of motion. I won't go into that in full details, that is set out in your report, so I assume that it has already been covered, but just to highlight at a high level what those concerns were. We first thought that the notice of motion was in breach of the decision-making requirements under the Local Government Act, which the details of which are set out in your report. We also thought that there was a high risk that it was outside the enabling powers under the Public Places Bylaw, and that was primarily because it was looking to put restrictions on vehicles based on the origin of their journey as opposed to the type of vehicle class. We also set out concerns that the designation was not supported by expert traffic engineering advice, and that meant that the safety impacts were not clear, and it also meant that we hadn't taken into account all relevant considerations. And importantly, we thought it was premature. As we outlined in the report, the Newcombe Road proposed sand quarry received resource consent, but that is currently subject to an appeal process in accordance with the Resource Management Act. And until that process is finalised, the end result of the resource consent is not fully known. So we set out those concerns in the report in further detail. As we received an email yesterday that proposed that today an amendment to the notice of motion would be proposed. And we have considered that. And I think the proposed notice was amended to address the concerns that were raised in the staff report. However, while it addressed some of those concerns, it did not address all of them, and staff still have very significant concerns on the amended notice of motion as proposed. And we'll just set those out in high level for you now. Firstly, we think overall the proposed amended notice of motion presents a clear judicial review risk. And just a reminder, as a public authority, we are susceptible to judicial review challenges, which is when a person may make a complaint about our decision and make a claim to the High Court that our decision was not lawful. The High Court would then consider the process that we made the decision, and if they considered that we had acted unlawfully, unreasonably, or without proper legal authority, it can set that decision aside. And so all our decisions will be seeking to make sure that they are lawful, not unreasonable, and in accordance with the proper authority. If a judicial review is made, that has significant cost implications for council. We will need to be paying for legal fees and expert fees in order to defend that claim. It can also have significant reputational risks for council. These often make the headlines in our local newspapers, and if a decision of council is quashed by a court for being unlawful, that can undermine the trust that the community has in our decision-making processes. So as much as possible, we try to avoid judicial review risks. So in terms of the amended proposed notice of motion, just to highlight what our concerns are, we firstly consider that they still do not meet the decision-making requirements under the Local Government Act. So under Section 78 of the Local Government Act, councils are required to take into account the consideration of the views and preferences of persons likely to be affected by or have an interest in the matter. In this case, before making the decision today, we do not know the NZTA's view on this proposal, which is important given the proximity of the intersection to the state highway. We do not know the views of the police, who will have a role in enforcing that designation. We also do not know the views of affected residents. So in this case, it will not just be quarry vehicles, it could be camper vans, it could be heavy farm vehicles, who will all be required to do a 7-kilometre loop to get back into Cambridge if they need to go there. We don't know what their views will be. Likewise, we do not know the views of residents who use the Hydro Road intersection, who will be affected by increased traffic volumes there. We also think, because the outcome of the Environment Court appeal process is not known, it is too premature to actually make this decision. Under Section 77 of the Local Government Act, we're required to consider options for the achievement of the objective. At this stage, we don't know what this outcome will be in order to have an objective, so it's too premature in our view to be considering options to rectify that, because we don't yet know what the outcome is. Our other concern is that, due to the documentation supporting the amended notice of motion, it is clear that it is intended to try and address the effects of the resource management consent that is being proposed for the Newcombe Quarry. It is our view that that is a high risk of being considered an improper purpose for using our bylaw making powers in this particular case. It would be more appropriate to wait until the outcome of that process to see if there's any residual effects. And lastly, it is not clear on the amended wording of the notice of motion what power has been relied on. It doesn't anymore refer to the public places bylaw, so in itself it's not actually referring to a legal authority to rely on to make that designation. And just sort of to cover, this isn't our usual process for exercising our powers under the public places bylaw in relation to traffic processes. So you may recall that for the Fort Street measures that were taken with parking, we had a consultation process where we consulted emergency services, affected residents, and those views and preferences were brought back to the Service Delivery Committee to consider and make an assessment of before reaching a decision. Likewise, we did that for the Walton Street one-way process, where we consulted with emergency services, affected businesses and residents to obtain their views on that new designation for a one-way street. Again, we took those preferences into account before making a decision. That hasn't happened in this particular case. So as stated, we think this presents judicial review risks. And as outlined in our staff report, we do not think that the updated designation includes enough evidence around the traffic risks and impacts. So we set out in the report that we had concerns about heavy vehicles now joining Hydro Road and the ability to do that safely. And now that the designation has been amended to not just cover quarry trucks, but also farm vehicles and camper vans and other heavy vehicles, that's going to have an even greater impact on local traffic who will be using the intersections that will now be more heavily used. And we're concerned that there is not enough analysis that we would usually do before making this type of decision to ensure that this designation would actually be safe for transport users and also the effects on traffic flow generally. So we still have those outlining concerns in relation to the amended designation. So finally, just to summarise, our advice is still that we would recommend that elected members do not approve the notice of motion as either original or as the proposed amended that was communicated to us yesterday. And we'll just note as a point that there will be time to reconsider this at another point in time when we know the full outcome of the Environmental Court appeal process. At that time, we'll have the opportunity to be able to fully analyse the transport impacts, if there are any, and if there's needed, any additional transport solutions that we need to implement as road controlling authority. And as part of that process, we'll have the ability to consult with affected members to fully understand their views, and then it will be open to council to consider bylaw making powers if considered appropriate. At this point of time, we think there's significant risks for doing that decision now. I'll just hand over to Wayne now to see if he has additional points.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, Diana. Just to reinforce the point that, look, there is a resource consent that has been issued by independent hearing commissioners, been appointed by the Waipa District Council in conjunction with Waikato Regional Council to jointly consider and hear the submissions and application and make the final decision. And that decision has been authorised, it's been approved. An appeal has been lodged. It's been lodged by a submitter in opposition to the application, which they have every right to do so. And that's submitted. Now, the appellant is appealing the entirety of that decision. Part of the appeal relief seeks to have the application declined. It is noted the appeal does not directly affect or directly refer to transportation issues. But importantly, we are part of those proceedings as a consent authority in that appeal of the sand quarry, and the inquiry cannot commence until that appeal has been resolved, either by consent order through a mediation process or by judicial hearing determination. So it's the staff's view that the council should first pause and consider the importance of knowing the outcome of the appeal and any granting of consent prior to the consideration of any notice of motion invoking the public places bylaw provisions, which restricts the heavy vehicle traffic movements on Newcombe Road into Tiro Road. Now, I understand that the applicant is making an application for a priority environment court hearing, so there may not be any mediation process. It may well go direct to hearing and be judicially considered and determined in that process. But secondly, even if the consent remains intact through the appeal process, the hearing commissioners were very careful in their analysis of expert traffic evidence before approving the application for providing a suite of conditions that the applicant need to comply with around the transportation issues in roading network. And that includes a review condition that the council can invoke under 128. So there is provision there to do that, to consider HCV movement trigger levels which may be exceeded through the Cambridge Township and mitigation measures which may not be in place and therefore a traffic impact assessment would be required that would trigger that 128 review process. So again, the staff recommendations is that the notice of motion invoking the public places bylaw restricting the direction of traffic movements should not be considered until the additional HCV traffic effects are known in Cambridge with any approved sand quarry consent and have been reviewed and considered by expert traffic engineers in our rating team, as Diana's indicated, at that particular point in time. And that will include any considerations of alternative routes. We've just heard that, for example, the Cambridge Pireri Expressway decision approving the consenting arrangements that will provide additional long-term transport options for traffic associated with the sand quarry. So that is just a recent decision that's come out just last week. So accordingly, we think now is not the right time to deal with the consideration of the public places bylaw through a notice of motion process, but it can properly be considered when there's more consent certainty and knowledge on the actual heavy vehicle traffic movements or anything being experienced in the Cambridge Township from the sand quarry operation, if it gets consent, having regard to the relevant consent conditions that I've just determined.
Thank you, Wayne. We also have, of course, Judith Cheney on the line, online. So just wondering, Judith, have you had any additional points to share?
Thanks, Diana. I'll just correct something that your mayor attributed to me earlier, that I'm a partner, but I'm not a senior. I'm a senior associate at Simpson Weston, so I won't accept that elevated role. I agree with what Diana had to say. And in fact, one of the points that she made, could give rise to an additional ground for judicial review by someone who's seeking to challenge the council's decision if it was made. So Diana noted the process that's been done for other similar roading changes and what the process that you've stepped through, and that's clearly involved expert advice and crucially sort of engagement with relevant stakeholders, and not just a reliance on a general understanding of community views about an issue. So although the Local Government Act doesn't include a requirement to consult, somebody could challenge the decision along with the other grounds that Diana's talked about on the basis of legitimate expectation that the council would consult on a matter like this before making a decision based on past practice. And I also just point out, consultation with the police or the NZTA about, how this might work, after the decision is made is not sufficient. You need to know what their views are before you make a decision like this when they'll be affected. And relying on views that you might know through a resource consent process, although there's obviously an alignment with some of that, and you can expect some of the same views. It's been clear in other cases that have said, consultation on one concept can't necessarily be relied on as providing sufficient consultation for a materially different concept. And what you're looking at here is, should you have a no right turn for heavy vehicles at a certain intersection? And that's not something that is specifically being, addressed through that resource consent process. So, I just note that there are things in your significance and engagement policy that do say that the form of engagement that you've used in the past for similar proposals and decisions will be considered in terms of how significant something is. You also say in that policy that you'll apply a consistent and transparent approach to engagement. So taking a consistent approach is important. I don't know that it's clearly expressed what the assessment of significance of this decision might be. And it's not necessarily just sort of like here's a standard traffic control. We've got a few yellow lines we're putting on a road or whatever. This does seem to be a matter of high significance or high interest in the community, these types of decisions. So, the consequences of it could be controversial. Because they seem to be unknown at the moment. So, there is a real risk that you're perhaps undermining the resource consent appeal process by trying to make a decision ahead of that process. And so the only other thing probably that I'd like to note is that also in the significance and engagement policy, I picked up that it says when the council makes a decision that's significantly inconsistent with that policy, you'll follow the steps identified in section 80. But I think the key point is here that you don't, as both your previous speakers have already noted, you don't need to consider whether this would be inconsistent with the significance and engagement policy, because you've got time to do this, to think about this decision properly and consider whether no right turn for heavy vehicles is actually something you need in the future. And then you can follow the usual process steps to get there. And that can all be done. You'll have time to do that once you know the outcome from the resource consent appeal before there's any increase in traffic movements. So, you may not even have a problem that needs to be addressed once you know the outcome of that appeal if the resource consent is ultimately refused. So, or there are other changes made. So it feels like it's a decision that's trying to be made ahead of there's actually a problem that needs to be addressed. That's probably all I've got, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Judith. So that's basically a summary of our advice. So very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Diana, Wayne and Judith. And sorry about the quick promotion there. We're seeming to be doing promotions all day, all round today. Look, as I'd indicated earlier, we will be following strict adherence to standing orders in this instance. So if people have questions of staff in respect of their report, now's your time to ask them. I'm not asking for you to advocate one way or the other right now. I will, once the questions have been clarified and answered, I'll ask staff to resume their seats, and we will address the more procedural matters in terms of the notice of motion in the first instance. So can I invite questions of Diana et al. Before we progress? Question? Roger?
Yeah.
Press the button.
Thank you. I don't exactly have questions of the staff, but I do. Sorry, Madam Chair, can I just state that I believe that this
Roger, this is an opportunity. Sorry, I'm just going to have to interrupt.
May negate the notice of motion, so it may mean that we defer the notice of motion. So I would like to say something now that might clarify the process going forward.
No, because I want to first see whether any other of the elected members have a question of our staff, and then I'll ask them, as I indicated, to take their seats. And then I was going to ask you to address your motion, and I was actually going to suggest that you had the opportunity to consider either withdrawing or amending. But for now, the process is I want to see if any of the other elected members have questions that they want answered from our staff in respect of them, in respect of the report and advice that they've given us, and then I will proceed as
I'm not
advised.
being allowed to speak at this stage.
Have you got a question?
Not a question.
Okay. Any other questions?
I didn't realise that the only
Clear.
opportunity was to be.
Roger,
had to be a question.
I'm following standing orders, and that is my decision. Questions of staff, Claire?
Yes, thanks. Look, it's been really helpful, Diana, you know, setting out the framework within which we need to consider this notice of motion, which I accept is, I guess, a pretty serious step, and it may be because of the level of feedback we're having from the community on this particular decision. So one of the things that you've mentioned about our requirements for decision making under the Local Government Act is that we've not necessarily consulted, but we're aware of the views of the people affected. And I was interested in your interpretation that just because we've been through a resource consent process, it doesn't necessarily mean that that covers that off. And I'd be interested in your comments in relation to, I think you mentioned, obviously the people that live on that road, yeah, and the applicant as well, the one that's wanting to operate the quarry, and then the police and possibly NZTA, like, so you've identified those as really significant stakeholders or whatever. And I'd just like to understand in more detail why you don't feel the resource consent process has allowed, I suppose, sufficient information for us to have that we could then apply that to using, you know, going through this notice of motion process. It'd be good to just get that in more clarity. Thanks.
Thank you. Through the chair. So we've got to look at that duty to take in views of the community on the particular decision at hand. So the decision in this case is whether to prohibit vehicles from turning right. The resource consent decision is what people provided submissions on. That was a different decision, and they don't necessarily translate to each other. They are different effects and there are different impacts. So that needs to be considered on a case-by-case approach. I'm not sure if Judith has anything further she wishes to add.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire.
No, I quite agree.
Okay, thanks, Judith. I have Andrew and Mike, then Liz. Sorry, Lou, Mike.
Thank you. Just a question is that with this legislation that we're, this motion, what legislation are we utilising if we were to impose that? Is there some legislation in place that we could actually do this? Because from my memory, and limited as it is, I've found that we're dealing with NZTA, the police and all these others, and all of that has to be ticked off before we can actually move on a motion such as this. And could Councillor, could Wayne actually expand a little bit on a 1 to 8, is it, Wayne? Just what a review would be later after the, you know, we could utilise later in the, if the resource consent was not, you know, not appealed and consented.
So through the chair, so we have the Public Places Bylaw, which has been made under both the Local Government Act, but also the Land Transport Act. And the land transport provisions in the Public Places Bylaw give us the authority to make designations to prohibit you know, what direction certain traffic may turn. And we've used that power previously, such as that Fort Street, the parking restrictions, and also the Walton Street one-way restriction. So we do have the power to do that, but the process that we do it needs to comply with our wider legal obligations, including those under the Local Government Act, which I've outlined previously.
Thanks, Dana. Wayne?
The second part of the question. So there are particular conditions in the consent that require the applicant, the consent holder, if the appeal is unsuccessful, to provide information to the council about and records about the numbers, date and time of departure and the numbers of heavy vehicles. And also in terms of and if there's any breaches of that consent, then they need to be addressed quickly. But in addition to that, and I indicated there's a suite of conditions associated with this approval. If triggers are exceeded in relation to the numbers of heavy vehicles that go through Cambridge, then there are further requirements in the conditions that indicate that traffic impact assessments that need to be undertaken, considering the safety and accessibility effects of the quarry traffic on pedestrians and cyclists using crossing the Cambridge through route roads, and mitigation measures need to be implemented from that traffic impact assessment. And if they are not, then the council can do a 128 review in accordance with those consent conditions to address those issues.
Thanks, Wayne. Mike?
Thank you, through the Mayor. I just want a clarifying question. Just if the alternate motion or proposal is put forward, I just want to make sure I think I've heard what I've heard. And that is, I didn't hear in particular yours, Diana, and Judith, your statements, either for or against. It's actually more about process in terms of timing and having enough information to ensure there's a sound process. Is that really what I'm hearing from you? Yeah.
Yes, in a nutshell. Yes.
All right. So that's quite important. That what I've heard here today is not a rebuttal of what could be, but a rebuttal around timing and the process, and there could be a better time to do this.
And just to add, that sort of transport analysis and input to ensure that it's a safe option.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, if it's just questions, then I'll stop at that.
Thanks, Mike. Liz?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions actually, just following up from you, Wayne, in regards to the monitoring that you were talking about just before. So if there was an objection or there was a concern that maybe those limits had been exceeded, the community would actually have to live with the ongoing heavy movements of vehicles through the town until the investigation had occurred, wouldn't they? So there's not an automatic stop of those vehicles, or is that a possibility? I just want to understand what that process might look like.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, and it's a good question. So there's a base level of approval, I guess, in terms of numbers of vehicles that can leave and go to and depart the site and travel in various directions. And so there's consent conditions around that. So if there's any breaches of those consent conditions, then the council has the ability not only to use the 128 provisions that I've just referred to in reviewing the consent conditions, but also the various provisions that are associated under the Resource Management Act in terms of warning notices and infringement notices and abatement notices. The question about does the community have to live with the amount of traffic that's going through as associated with the sand quarry, I think, as I said, and as Councillor Pettit has picked up on, it's a matter of timing too, because we do have the public places bylaw to consider at a future point in time if we think that there is an issue to be addressed in regards to that. So it's about having certainty in the issue about the consent and whether it's valid or not through the appeal process, and then understanding the actual effects of the traffic through Cambridge. And once we understand that and get the appropriate advice from our traffic engineers, then the council can consider at that point in time any provisions that they have available under the RMA and also the public places bylaw. So hopefully that's answered the questions in that regard.
Yeah, it was really just For me, I just want there to be clarity that the traffic movements will continue until a abatement notice has been issued, and I guess there's a decision at the end of it. So there's ongoing movement of traffic vehicles. I just want the community and us to be really clear about that. My second question is actually just to Diana around judicial reviews. In your time here, or even if you've got knowledge prior, how many judicial reviews has council actually had? I don't recall many, or if any, actually. I just wondered if that's something that we see on a regular basis that we perhaps don't know about.
So just going back to your first question again. So of course, there's the limits within the conditions of consent. So the consent has been issued, is subject to appeal. We'll see what comes out of the appeals process, but the consent is being issued subject to those limits. And that's what's been approved.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Liz. I've got Dale-Marie and then Philip.
Oh, that's the second point.
Oh, sorry, Dana.
Through the Chair, in response to your question, I'm aware of one actual judicial review that's been there since the 5 years I've been at council, but perhaps there haven't been many before, and that many more due to our robust decision-making processes that we have in council. But even if it just takes one person to take one, and if there is a flaws in decision and people we're concerned enough about the impacts, then they can take that. So even though there might not be something that we'll be doing on a yearly basis, it's still something we need to be cognizant of, and is also part of our wider responsibility, certainly as staff, to do the right thing in terms of compliance with our legal obligations.
Great, thank you. Dale-Marie and then Philip and then Roger.
This is more, not really, well, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to provide a space to show our residents the process. Because I think some of the things that I encountered around being the host applicant around the incineration plant, and I know that after this, there's probably going to be some annoyed residents that didn't see the motion go through because it has brought them hope in some kind of way. I'm hoping that there could be some way that we have an opportunity to have a wānanga or an information workshop that people can understand why the process is the way that it is and what constraints we have at council.
Just point of order. We're not the host applicant for the,
No, we're not.
that's what you said.
Regulatory authority.
I just want to be sure that the
regulatory
public don't think
authority.
we are the applicant, that's all.
Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification, Liz. Did either you, Wayne, or Dana have any answer to that question in respect of conveying the landscape that we find ourselves in respect of not only the consent given, but potentially the possible knockback of a solution that may have appeared? Can I have your comments on that?
So through the chair, understand that there is information available on our website, but we could have a look at what that information is in terms of being really clear about the process for this particular application appeal process. We can have a look at that and see if there's anything that could be added to that to assist our communities to better understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsty. Philip.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to get some clarification. We're just talking about the legal process here at the moment, not our views on this. Is that?
Yeah. Just if you have any questions on the advice that's been given by staff in either the paper or their supplementary presentation today.
I'm a Hydro Road resident, have been since nappies.
Roger, have you got a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wayne, can you confirm that the advice that I've been given by one of the traffic consultants that was involved in the hearing, that in fact the impacts of any level of traffic either coming or going from Newcombe Road, the impacts of that traffic on our Victoria Road stretch of road between the two roundabouts was never considered as part of the hearing.
Look, that's a matter of detail, and I'm not sure if it's a roading engineering question there. So I'm not going to get into the detail of what one traffic engineer said versus other traffic engineers. There were traffic engineers that represented both the applicants, submitters, NCTA, the council. There were competing views in regard to the traffic evidence. The hearings panel, as I said, robustly considered all the traffic evidence and considered that the application should be approved. But I know I can't get into the specifics there, Councillor.
Okay, I can give you the assurance that it wasn't, but okay.
Any other questions in respect of staff advice, both in the papers and supplementary today, before I invite them to take a seat? No? Yeah. Actually, before you go though, I see that you would like to make a small amendment to the recommendation at paragraph A. In our agendas, it just has a full stop after the ECM number. We also need to receive the report that staff have provided us today, so via the PowerPoint presentation. So the suggested amendment is to include the wording at the end of A and PowerPoint presentation tabled at the meeting of 24 September 2025 and included in the minutes. So that will be an amendment.
Through the chair, we recommend that resolution is looked at now, and then the notice of motion can be looked at as the next item.
Okay. So I'm comfortable with moving that amended recommendation, and Andrew will second that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? You're recording against the receipt of the reports. Okay. Can we make sure that that is recorded? Yeah. Just A. You're fine with it now, okay? And we shall also move probably B and C to note that Councillor Gordon has provided the notice of motion, and that council's and that notes staff advice that council should not approve the notice of motion, and then we deal with the notice of motion separately. So again, I'm happy to move those from the chair, and Claire will second those. Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? You're voting against B and C, noting that he's provided a motion and that staff advice should not approve the motion. Okay. So it's not the substantive notice of motion, it's just a receipt of and noting, but that's nevertheless, we shall record their opposition. So thank you, staff, and if I can invite you to take a seat. Now we'll deal with the substantive parts of the notice of motion, and I'm going to advise or remind people that standing orders rules will apply, including a 5-minute speaking rule. And Claire has told me she has a bell at the ready, which she will ding at 5 minutes. I'm very brutal about it, no warnings. But look, I think I might just take a brief adjournment, and I might just invite Councillor Gordon to consider whether he may wish to amend or withdraw his motion. So let's just take a few minutes pause, and we shall.
Speak on that now, without an adjournment.
All right then.
But
all right. Well, Roger.
Am I going to be limited in the time that I've got to speak?
Yes, you have 5 minutes.
Because we're not actually discussing the notice of motion, so we're still, okay. Look, first of all, just to
We are discussing discussing the notice of motion, Roger.
Where the notice of motion came from, and that was, first of all, we and certainly I as a commissioner, respected the appointment of the panel and therefore weren't understanding or were allowing the panel to make their judgment before we could give an opinion. And that was our advice, I think, round this table. So we respected that, and it wasn't until the decision came out and the conditions that were imposed by Waipa District Council and by Waikato Regional Council were considered to be not strong enough to control the impact of their decision. That prompted the notice of motion. So it was timed to be after that. So it was not anything to do with whatever's happening outside. I'd just like to say that we've today heard some further concerns that officers have got that we have not had the opportunity to respond to. Our letter that was submitted to Council yesterday readily opened first in the first paragraph that we would like to continue discussions with Council officers to determine a possible solution. And in fact, the letter finished with the offer to open discussions with staff to continue them. We had absolutely no communication from Council prior to this meeting. Now, I think that that is not in good faith of working with councillors. It is obvious that the tenor of this meeting, given the passing of the last motion, that somebody has worked well to gather the numbers against the notice of motion. So we feel that it's appropriate at this stage to withdraw that notice of motion, because that gives us the opportunity to reintroduce the notice of motion at an immediately future council meeting, so that we can actually, within some time of the new council, we can reintroduce it again. But it does give us the time to consider those points, and we would ask staff if they could really to confirm those concerns that they've now got again, if they could confirm those concerns back to the 4 Cambridge members that actually moved this motion. Because I have to tell you, there is considerable, absolutely considerable concern within the community as to what's happening over this decision. So we would like to defer or postpone the consideration of the notice of motion to some council meeting in the future.
So
and we have the ability within the...
pursuant to Standing Order 27.5, notices of motion lapse when notice of motions are not moved when called for by the chairperson. So I'm taking from what you've just indicated
lapsed,
that you won't wish to be putting your motion.
This current notice of motion will lapse, and therefore it can be re-established. There is no time limit to its re-establishment, which if it had been put, then there may have been some limitation to time, but that means that from the new council, whoever that is, can actually raise it at any time within the future.
Okay. So
and it gives us the opportunity to consider the council's
thank you, Roger. Your point's been made. So what I take it is that the notice of motion that you provided, together with potential amendment, you are not going to put to seeking seconder today, and it therefore will lapse on the assumption that is, you're agreeing with me that is what your course of action is.
We are allowing that notice of motion to lapse.
So that being the case, that brings this discussion in respect of said notice of motion to a conclusion. And can I also, while we're at it, thank Judith for providing staff with a very quick turnaround of advice, and staff for attending to this very quickly in short time frame.
Is there an opportunity to speak on this?
No, because the motion hasn't been put So that is that. Let us now adjourn. We've got a morning tea break allocated in our agenda at 11:40. So we're actually bang on time. Look at that. All right. So we shall return for our next item on our agenda, which is the Audit and Risk Committee item at 11:50. Thanks very much. Now that Monty has seated himself, let's reconvene our meeting. So our next item on our agenda is the audit and risk paper, which the Audit and Risk Committee meeting papers. I'm sorry, my machine's taking a while to open. And online, we have Bruce Robertson attending today, and obviously George and Jenny. So look, I will pass the mantle over to you, Jenny. Your paper. Nice to see you both. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Susan. I'll take the report as read and highlight the following points. One of the key items of the report are the revised top risks for this financial year, and these are recommended for approval by Council today. As part of this, ARC considered and are recommending a revised risk appetite framework to make it easier to reference during decision making. Understanding risk appetite is critical as we head into the next corporate planning cycle. The other appendices have been included for information. As discussed previously, we invite the independent chair to talk with council as part of the ARC reporting back process each 6 months. So I'll hand over to Bruce now.
Thanks, Jenny, and great to see some familiar faces. Probably the second time I seem to have been in your council chamber many times in the course of the last month, but I think it just reflects some of the good work you folk are doing and my deep appreciation that you have included me, but also my colleague Carol as your independent members in on a number of those proceedings. As Jenny's said, in thinking through the work of the committee, we have been keen to up the level of communication between the work that the committee does and actually your role as governors of the organisation. Because sometimes I think it possibly is that you may think things happen in our committee, they don't, I don't know, or it might be that in fact you are even unaware of what we're doing or even why it's important. So today's paper that you have is actually really important. I just thought I'd like to try and do two things really. One is just briefly address the point that Jenny has raised, which is that we have updated our risk management framework to include risk appetite. And I'd just like to very briefly touch on what risk appetite is and why it's important. And secondly, just take the opportunity looking more broadly at the work of the committee to outline for you what I would call our risk profile. What is YPAR's risk profile? And to steal my thunder for when I conclude, that's important for all of you because we believe that the risk profile is the one that you will be receiving post-elections, for those of you that are standing, that you will have to deal with. And I'd just like to make a couple of comments on the end about how I would go about that. So look, the focus, as I've said, is on some sense of where we are as a council right at the moment. And just to remind you, this is my little bit of lecturing, strategic risk governance, which is what the risk committee and some of my colleagues in the room there are involved in, is about grabbing the opportunities in front of us by trying to anticipate the obstacles and uncertainties that may affect achieving our objectives. That's a long way of saying something bad can happen to the extent that we can't achieve what we want to achieve. You folk are all on council to achieve something. At the moment, it's basically embodied inside your LTP, but matters could arise which stop you achieving what you want to do in that LTP. That is what we would call strategic risk. So the risk management framework we have, in which we're amending with this risk appetite diagram, is part of the language of governance. And the risk appetite is really important. So if you go to page 61, I've got it on the open agenda, you'll see a table. And this table defines how the committee has started to think around what is our risk appetite. So what we do is we identify strategic risk, we call it out, we assess the status of that risk, how big a risk is it, and we now identify how that sits relative to our sense of risk. There's nothing new in this. Probably one of the most obvious ways in which many of you probably do it in your life is your KiwiSaver. If you're old like me, what is the accepted mantra around risk appetite investing in KiwiSaver? When you're old, what do? You look for a more conservative investment profile. Why? Because as you get older, you need the certainty of return. Whereas conventional wisdom is if you're younger, you can take a more aggressive or open approach to risk because you've got time between being young and when you want to retire or make use of that KiwiSaver, where you can deal with the swings and roundabouts that often come with a more aggressive investment profile. So our risk profile on page 61 here is just trying to define what actually is really important to us. So the committee recognises our financial strategy, for instance, is one that we don't want to take a lot of risk in. So it does mean that looking at that table, the risk appetite we have tends to go towards the bottom end of that table, which is, I better look at it very quickly while I'm talking to you, brings us into the moderate low or very low. In other words, we don't and we can't countenance significant deviation from that financial strategy. There's nothing new in this. This is exactly what you do naturally as governors. We're just trying to put a language around it. So this has been really important for us in the committee. And I'd like to suggest as you go into your planning cycle with both your annual plan and your long-term plan, thinking with some of this information is really valuable. So there we go. That's the first part, and I think your role is to adopt that. And I'm happy to, conscious that you may want to have questions as you go into it. But can I now ask you to go to page 86? Because I'd just like to give you a sense of the committee's view on our risk profile, because it's actually, in the long run, it's your risk profile. So 86 is part of embedded in the report, and it's got two things. It's got a colourful little map at the bottom of the page, but I want to refer you to the top line or the top graph, largely in that sort of teal colour, because what it outlines is 11 strategic risks. So these are all matters which we think are current right at this moment, which any one of those could have a significant impact on us achieving our objectives and outcomes that we seek through the long-term plan. Okay, I'm not going to go into those. We're into a risk workshop if that's the case. What I want to reflect, though, is if you look at it, you will see that 7 of those 11 are outside our risk appetite. Now, that means that the position we are in is uncomfortable. And this is the environment which naturally is coming about. Let me characterise it. You've got ongoing reform and change being imposed, and that's not a political statement, but being imposed on us from central government. You've got your own initiated change, albeit put on us in one sense with water reform and the creation of Waikato Waters done well. You've got the uncertainty of climate change and the impact that may have on community facilities and the community as a whole. We've got the issue of growth. It's the opportunity and the benefit of growth, but we've also got the issues of growth, and know that the actions of our developer community are important on us and indeed our finances. So what I'm saying is when we have mapped it and looked at this, we're saying that 7 of these risks are outside appetite. And if you take a pen very quickly, there are 2, our ability to invest in infrastructure. There are number 3, which is around our financial strategy. Number 4, meeting growth. Number 5, climate change. 6, our iwi relationship. 8, which is change and reform. And 11, which is one that we added on this year, which is the transformation to Waikato water. Using our risk matrix on page 26, they all sit outside where we want them to be. Cold comfort news, but actually that's also where most of local government is at the moment. But these reflect the strategic challenges that those of you returning as the new council will need to grapple with. Okay, now, ideally, in a good world, if you're outside appetite, to use the phrase of our Prime Minister, you have a laser focus on bringing a matter inside your risk appetite. The challenge for us here is that for a good number of these, they are externally driven. They aren't of our making, if I can put it that way. So the normal technique should bring, which would be to implement controls which lower your risk, generally aren't available. When you've got a risk environment, you then start to look to try and monitor what are the effects of any of these risks crystallising. You try and mitigate those. That's probably where we are with these in terms of that. But what does it mean? As I've said, it means that as you go into the new trinium, those of you that put your hand up and return to the table, these are going to dominate not only next year, quite frankly, but my view, the next 2 to 3 years. In other words, the next triennium of Waipa District Council. And actually, it isn't just a requirement on the Audit Committee to deal with these, but actually it's going to be a requirement on all of Council to think their way through it. I think there's a couple of things, if I can, I know I'm being a bit preachy, but a couple of things, Susan, that I'd like to put in front of you guys. First thing is just acknowledgement. You can't escape these. They are going to be with you in the next 2 to 3 years. So you have to be prepared as a body to deal with them. Now, the committee will do its best to monitor and keep its eye on this and through this sort of situation, come back to you relative to where these risks are with our appetite. But it will mean the new council will need to strategise carefully how it mitigates the effects of these risks. The importance of building a consensus of how you deal with these matters will be really, really important. It's going to be a difficult thing because you're all out in the stump. You're all naturally and should be putting forward ideas about what you'd like council to achieve. But when you come together as a new council, the ideal of what you want to achieve will have to be balanced against these strategic risks, the ones which are particularly outside your risk appetite as it stands at the moment. So I think it's important that I just reflect that for you as you leave council for the trinium and you head into a new one, that the committee has done its work. In some sense, I want to say we've done our job, but I just want to reflect that actually the work we are doing, I would hope, is useful around the full council table. And thirdly, that you'll have to grapple with it. So that's where I'd like to leave it at this stage, Susan and Jenny, but I'm certainly open to any questions that people would like to have.
Thanks, Bruce. Some very sage observations in there. And yeah, it's somewhat sobering to know we're not in this alone in a manner of speaking. But look, any questions for Bruce while we have him with us? Andrew.
Thanks. I wasn't at the workshop, but looking through this, to me, it represents a significant advance on where we have been in audit and risk. I wish I could say a significant advance in where we are with the risks, but you know, knowing what you've got in front of you and facing them is the start to you know, managing, I suppose, the risk where we are. I did have a question on page 110, just clarifying for me. This was the World Economic Forum top 10 risks, and I wasn't really understanding what critical change to Earth systems means. Can anyone enlighten me on that? Climate collapse, okay.
Right, oceans, you know, like the Gulf Stream, that warms.
Okay, yeah, all right. Yeah, no, thank you, that's good. I probably could have looked it up myself, but I didn't. And I just got a comment on number 4 there, natural resource shortages. I don't really see that as being much for us personally, but that's only my view, so.
Andrew, if I just comment, we did, when we went through our refresh of our risk profile as a whole, what were the 11 risks that we settled on? And 11 just happens to be a number, by the way. We did spend some time looking at this to try and reflect. These are the set that we see, but let's look at what people are seeing elsewhere. And are these ones significant influences at the moment on our current risk profile? So we took it into account without me being able to give you or necessarily using this as a time to explain those that we didn't take into account in the profile we've settled on.
All right, thanks, Bruce. And the only other comment I've got is page 122, where you say, following the discussion, workshop staff proposed that a more in-depth update on cybersecurity risk is undertaken. I'm really in favour of that, because I know we're in a pretty good space with our IT stuff, but it's evolving so much, and it's a risk that is happening less. But when it does happen, the consequences can be really, really severe. So, yeah, no, very good work.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other questions of Bruce? No? Jenny, did you wish to speak to anything further? No? No questions for any of these people? Otherwise, we shall turn our Claire, I knew you would.
Well, I did read the top risks and just had a few questions about some of them. That's all. Is that the right time? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like Andrew, I think you've done a great job. Yeah. It's good to see it set out, and I certainly am not contesting any of the major risks that I've got there. It's just understanding some of the detail, I guess. So I'm looking on page 89? I think it's 89, which is the first risk about workforce capacity and capability. Just under the current mitigations and controls, there's mention of responding to issues identified in the annual staff engagement survey. Yeah. So this is something that I don't know if the selected membership has had detailed visibility on what those issues are, but I think given that we often hear that there's you know, real stress and workload issues, that I think that we do need to certainly have to understand what those major issues are, certainly not in any detail that would identify anyone, but because if we're trying to manage these risks, but we don't know exactly what they are, yeah, I feel quite strongly that we need to have some kind of feel for what's being encountered, you know, in the workforce, and then to understand how you, Steph, are addressing them, yeah, and whether or not we feel that's enough or not, because otherwise, you know, the consequences then do fall back on elected members and how we've discharged our duties and things like that. Yeah.
Bruce, are you happy if I respond to that?
Oh, for sure, go for it.
So great question, Claire, and it's very true. And the exec, particularly George and I, have been having a conversation about the need to develop a much more coherent corporate performance framework reporting back to council, which discusses how the organisation's settings are right to deliver on the long-term plan and the aspirations of council. And that includes how we're going, not just financially, but non-financially, and the people aspect of the business, including the annual staff engagement survey and what's coming through. So you can see over time trends and themes, and you get evidence of what are the actions we are undertaking to address those issues. We're missing that framework, and it's one of the work-ons for the organisation in the next year.
Claire, sorry, if I could just jump in there, please, Susan. Claire, that's your comments are bang on. And actually, it's a good advertisement for coming to the Audit and Risk Committee. I know none of you need another meeting like a hole in the head, I suspect. But I just would like to reflect that the committee obviously monitors these risks, and we do it through a number of ways. Obviously, we get Jenny's really good quarterly report. So the indicators on that page are reported to us on a quarterly basis and give us a sense of whether this is a risk that is increasing or decreasing and where it stands relative to our risk appetite. But we also do a deep dive, so we'll meet with the risk owner on this one, Steph, obviously, and talk through these settings, which include the sorts of questions that you've raised. And I think I'd also like to reflect that we have the very good practice at Waipa of time with Steph, where she's able to raise matters and issues with us that are really important and may or may not touch on this sort of risk. So it is well monitored, but I hear you say it's a really good point that actually this starts to show some of the information that may be helpful from a governance perspective, and particularly if you meet my challenge, that you need to work together to strategise over these.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. That's great. I had another question on page 90. And so this is to do with failure to adequately invest and deliver infrastructure. And in the middle of the page, right at the bottom, where we will take risk, it says council may take opportunity to re-engage discussions in shared services. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I thought we were engaging in shared services and looking at opportunities all the time to see how we can work smarter together. Yeah. And that's where we will take risk.
Yeah, so I hear you, Councillor St Pierre, and I think that needs to be reworded. So thank you for pointing that out. It's absolutely ongoing conversations all the time about how we work across the region and create those efficiencies and collaboration opportunities.
On page 92, a similar question for failure to manage the financial strategy. Again, right at the bottom of the page, on the far right-hand side, where we will not take risk, it's got council will not compromise on the delivery of all services. So I guess this is a point in time where that statement has been made, because I can recall a conversation when we were signing off on the LTP that one of the, I suppose, early decisions we made was that we wouldn't reduce levels of service, but that conversation needed to be reactivated. And so I'm just signalling that it may be on this report here, but I certainly don't take it as a given going forward. That's all.
Can I just jump in there, Susan? That's a really good point, Claire, and that's where our risk appetite table becomes really important. Because if you look at it and you match what risk setting we have for those items with that table, there is a right-hand column, which is the trade-offs. And so this becomes really important in having that sort of discussion, and indeed this point in time statement clear whether in fact you would hold to it. The more conservative you are, it may well be that you aren't prepared to make that trade-off. Or it can work the other way, actually. perhaps you have to start being prepared to make a trade-off on levels of service if you want to preserve your financial strategy. So there's the value of that table as you have what you are helping us engage in here, which is a very good risk discussion.
And I'd just like to say, Bruce, too, that you mentioned the trade-off. So that was something that was introduced in this report about trade-offs. Yeah,
Yes.
which I thought was really good. Yeah.
That's the benefit of that. That's the benefit of that table. Claire, just as a good advertisement for Waipa, I'm taking this table to the new mayor's school, so everybody will hear about Waipa, Claire.
And I just wanted to add a point too, that what you're alluding to, Claire, is risk management is dynamic. You know, we have to have the constant ongoing conversations and constant revisiting of these settings to make them useful.
James, did you want to add something there?
Claire, because we talked about in the workshop we had how we were going to start at the financial strategy first for the next LTP rounds. And by doing that, we will set what follows underneath as opposed to doing a bottom up and then making it all work. So it's such a good point and definitely something on our radar.
Good stuff. Any other questions or comments in respect to this piece of work? So we have a recommendation. I've got it on page 69 because I've refreshed my my agenda, but I believe for those who haven't refreshed, it should be on page 60. Because there was the addition of a paper earlier, the presentation, but the recommendations are to receive Jenny's report, to endorse the risk appetite statement framework, and to further endorse the top risks 25-26 document. So do I have a mover? Roger, you're going to move that for us. Thank you. And Andrew will second that. I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you. And thank you, Bruce. If I'm not mistaken, this will probably be audit risk next Monday, of course.
You are
not quite.
mistaken.
You've had a lot of finals, eh?
Yeah, death by 1,000 cuts here, I reckon.
Yeah, I reckon.
Anyway, there we
I
go.
reckon. But thanks so much for joining us today and giving the context and background behind that item. It's really valuable.
Thank you. Catch you later, you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Right, then the next item on our agenda is a resolution to exclude the public. It's appearing on page 180 of my agenda. Some very solid and plausible grounds there in respect of our Chief Executive's employment arrangements and other items that are very legitimately withheld or held in a public excluded environment. And I'm more than happy to move that from the chair, and Claire will second that. I'll put the motion. All those in